So then what was your intro to tarot? When did you find tarot? And what were some of the stigmas that you had to work through when coming to it?
So my impression of tarot, kind of growing up in the 90s and the early 2000s, watching movies like The Craft and things like that, encountering psychics in these sorts of settings like New Orleans. And then somewhere around like 2015 is when I ordered my first deck. And I think that that is when I was seeing more tarot readers, maybe on Instagram. I was following people like, Sarah Gottesdiener of the Moon Studio, and kind of just really drawn toward these beautiful cards. Like it was almost then an aesthetic resonance. And I was like, this is really beautiful. And I was in a period of my life where I just had a lot of questions that I could not figure out the answers to. The types of questions that don't really have an answer, like, what is my purpose? What should I be doing next? These things where there's not a clear path or one specific answer. There's so many answers to what is your purpose, and you need a more, I think, intuitive tool to help tap into that. So I was searching for these answers. I was feeling drawn toward the beauty of the tarot cards, and I ordered my first deck. Actually, like in a super not magical way. I was at a bar with friends. We were talking about it, and I got on Amazon and I just ordered a deck off Amazon at like 11 p.m. on a Wednesday night. Very just like, okay, I just need to try this out. And I got that deck and I started working with it. I would ask questions, I'd pull cards, I'd open the little tiny book that came with it and read what they meant. And I'd journal about that and think about what they said. And that was really the beginning of my practice of like my actual working with the cards.
Okay, what I really love is, which we can come back to later, but you mentioned questions with no specific answers, and how often it is more intuitive based tooling that helps us get to the root of where it is that we might be going, for example. Also, I love this ordering of cards from a bar at 11 p.m. I love this because it breaks the stigma too of tarot, right? I remember for myself, I moved to North Carolina when I was around 11 and became really good friends with this woman, Andrea, this girl, Andrea. At the time we were girls. And her mom was a tarot reader. And so from that moment on, I was just exposed to it. But she comes from a very, Italian folklore background where the practice is very much about lineage and like someone else seeing the magic in you and gifting you the cards and then teaching you the ways. And it's very much passed down through generations. And so I thought it was like a magical party that I wasn't invited to. And I thought that I didn't have access to it. And so I was really comfortable with it, but I stayed kind of away from it, a little distance from it. And then, later on in life, I was like, let's explore this. And so I love how not magical, we could say, your experience was in just being like, I'm going to just order. It's like a fuck it moment. You're like, fuck it. I'm just doing this, right? At a bar with friends. I need a deck. Let's go.
I think you're really speaking to two different approaches to tarot. So I think we can see tarot within the folk magic tradition. Tarot at its essence is a deck of playing cards. It's using a deck of playing cards to answer a question about the present or the future or whatever, or the past or whatever it might be. And from what I've read, it has roots going back to the mid 15th century. So this is a centuries long practice. And for many people, it does live within these folk magic traditions, which are often handed down and are about lineage and are about, sharing and passing information and stories over time. And I think that that is really beautiful and sacred and something that I do want to uphold and respect. And simultaneously, I think we can also see tarot as an archetypal intuitive tool. And so many people within tarot will, see the sorts of sets of Jungian archetypes and see a more like collective subconscious experience. So we can encounter it in that way. And I think that's more how I have approached it, because like you, I didn't have anyone who was like passing down the lineage of tarot to me. My family definitely had like all of the Christianity had wiped the folk magic right out of them. Even my Italian ancestors on my mom's side, like that was all God. We were just non-magical Christians growing up. And so I think my entry then was through this more sort of like archetypal approach and intuitive approach and personal approach. And that's how I've encountered the cards. But I think we can still hold both as true and hold them both together.
The archetypal approach, I feel like this is such a beautiful doorway into the woo-woo in general, is just beginning to look at archetypes because it's so user-friendly. And it doesn't have to be magical. We can see within these archetypes different elements of ourselves, and we can see ourselves embodying these different archetypes at different points in our lives. And I think it's such a beautiful invitation to experience different perspective as well. You said that you don't necessarily use tarot as divination or a psychic practice. When you started, okay, two questions. When you started, did you like experiment with that? And then the second one would be, how do you then use tarot? What does that look like?
When I went to the cards in my 20s, I was just really struggling to figure out what was happening in that time of my life. And so I really went to it with a lot of confusion and anxiety around the present and wanting to untangle the present moment. And I think tarot was actually really supportive in that. And in some sense, that's how I've continued to use the cards. And I think I would distinguish between divination and planning here. I think there's a sense of like asking a tool to tell us what will happen in the future, which feels a little more like divination or like future telling to me. And then there's like asking a tool to be like, okay, if I take this step, if I'm thinking about this thing, like what might come up? What might I encounter? And it's less about like what will happen. It's more about what energy might I be working with, or like if I head this direction, or what's going on right now. I think that's where it starts for me, like what's happening right now. And then I'm considering some steps and like, what can I know about that? So for me at this stage in my tarot practice, I think of tarot as these like archetypal mirrors. And every time I go to the tarot, I'm asking a question. And sometimes I'm asking a literal question, like, I don't know, what's going on with me and this client right now? Or like, why do I feel so frustrated in this project? Like sometimes they're very like literal tactical questions. And sometimes it's just the act of questioning itself. Like I don't have a specific question in mind. I just inquiring with the cards about what's present or what's past, present, and future, which is a common way of pulling 3 cards, one for the past, one for the present, one for the future. And when I pull the cards, I inquire with myself, like, does this resonate? Does this feel right? Does it make sense? If the answer is yes, I can then like write and explore and think more about why. If the answer is no, then I get to ask myself, okay, this doesn't resonate, but does it feel like there might be something hidden for me in this that I'm like not really ready to face or that I'm not dealing with that I can uncover? And sometimes the answer is like, oh yeah, that is underneath there. And I hadn't been thinking of it that way. Sometimes working with the tarot in that way like breaks up a story I'm telling myself and lets me see through it. Because often I think we get really stuck in our thought patterns and we get really attached to these stories we've been telling ourselves for a long time, or stories that other people have told us about ourselves or about life. And I think tarot can be really good at either mirroring back, like, yeah, that's the story, or like, no, you're not, like, we have to get underneath that. We have to see through that. We have to break that down. And then the third option is sometimes I look at a card and I'm like, that does not resonate. I don't think that's present at all. And I'm just going to not deal with, like, we're just going to pull another one. Like sometimes I just put the card back and I pull another card out. And I think it's important to like, that can't be the first thing you do. Like, I don't think the purpose of tarot is to just like constantly be pulling cards that affirm what you're already thinking. I think that's what the archetypal mirroring is to me. It's like showing me something and allowing me to kind of bounce off of that, look at that, see what resonates, see what doesn't, ask if there's something I'm not considering, and just consider new and different things. And that's so helpful in our personal lives. But I also think, as a small business owner or as an employee or someone leading a team, like it can just be really helpful to me, the tarot cards are just a way of having a totally different voice in the room so that you can get other insight. And sometimes that insight will affirm what you already think is the case. And sometimes it will bring something totally new to the table. And then you can either like take that on or let it go. That's how I use the tarot now.